Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this year's computer vision lecture. This lecture takes place for now via Zoom, and you will be recorded. So one person just turned on his video. Maybe ideally just turn off your video stream because all of this will be recorded and appear in YouTube. If you have any questions, obviously you can just raise your hand and then turn on your mic and ask your questions. If you don't want to be recorded, you can just send your questions here via the chat, and I'll be happy to answer your questions without explicitly referring to you personally. I've been teaching this computer vision course now for quite a few years. I started teaching this course in 2020 when I started here as a professor, and I've just checked this is now the sixth time I'm teaching computer vision, and a lot has happened in that field. And I'm just very happy to teach this course this year since computer vision is a very hot topic with lots of opportunities in industry and research. What we will do in this course is we will start today with an introduction to the field of computer vision, some of the challenges. We will also look into pixel images and filters to manipulate these images. That's what we're going to do today. And then in the following lectures, we will look into regions of images, how to segment images, how to detect certain features in images, and how to use these features to detect objects in images. And then we will also spend quite some time on convolutional neural networks. Convolutional neural networks are one approach to solving computer vision problems. And there are many more approaches. And what's important to me is that this is not a deep learning class for computer vision, but rather we will look at convolutional neural networks as well as many other methods, because eventually, once you have a job in industry, you will not always just be doing deep learning, but rather you need to be able to pick the right methods and combine them. And sometimes that's deep learning, sometimes that's even vision transformers, but many times it's maybe more classic approaches to computer vision. And in this course, I want you to see all of this and be able to pick the right methods for your problems. Now, so far, I have only talked about images. Eventually, we also may want to work with videos or image sequences. So later in this course, we will look at image sequence processing. And then actually, we have a lot of tools available that we can use to build really good computer vision systems. In the Outlook chapter, we have a few selected Outlook topics that we can only discuss at the end of this introductory course, like vision transformers, 3D vision, and this kind of stuff. But some of you may be interested in not just building vision systems, but actually have vision systems that can interact with their world. So we will look also into the foundation of mobile robotics, and then you'll be enabled to build robot vision systems. So this is our roadmap for this course. Later, I'll talk a little bit more about the organization and the examination and what you need to follow. But first, we start a little bit with a motivation of this course. The question is, what is actually computer vision? There are lots of definitions for that field, and one definition is that computer vision is the field that deals with how computers can gain an understanding from digital images or videos. And all of us deal with computer vision systems essentially every single day. And I want to know from you if you have already worked on some computer vision problems in the past or not. If you have, maybe just click like a green emoji or something like this here in Zoom, or send some positive reaction in case you have already worked on computer vision problems. And if you have, feel free to send us in the chat what you have done so far. Be very happy to hear from you what you have already worked on. You can also just raise your hand in Zoom and turn on your mic and tell us a little bit what you have been working on in computer vision, or just send it here in the chat. Be very happy to see what you've done so far. One person has worked on convolutional neural networks for image classification. That's great. We will also be looking into this in this course. If there are any more answers in the chat, I'd be happy as well, and I'll see what will come in. One person has worked on medical image classification with convolutional neural networks. One person worked on a hobby project tracking the path of a barbell through computer vision. One student is currently doing an internship and working on computer vision in electron microscopy. One student says that he developed a computer vision solution using convolutional neural networks that perform automated poultry autopsies. Very interesting. Thanks for all these comments. So I see most of the input so far is about convolutional neural networks, which is one approach to computer vision. But something we actually see is that most of modern computer vision is based on statistical methods and not rule-based systems. And machine learning is one of those directions you can take in statistical methods of computer vision. And the convolutional neural networks are, again, one area in machine learning. And we'll be looking at convolutional neural networks, but we'll be looking at other methods as well. And all of us deal with computer vision probably every single day as an end user. There are numerous applications for computer vision. I will mention now some of them. If you have more applications of how you think we deal with computer vision every day, feel free to send this now in the chat, and I'll be happy to mention the examples then that you will be able to write now in the meantime. For example, optical character recognition is a computer vision application we deal oftentimes with. Like we take photos of handwritings, whatever, and it's turned into digitized text. It's used by post offices to handle your letters and in order to identify your handwriting on the envelope. Autonomous driving is an example of computer vision, face recognition, and with all these fancy apps on our phones to make us look younger, older, whatever. So all of those are computer vision applications. One person in this chat writes about car detection, traffic lights. Yes, that's, for example, one example. About your previous project experience, one student mentions that he used YOLO V8. YOLO V8 is a neural network that we will also be discussing in a couple of weeks. And that student worked on tracking the coordinates of facial elements to place 3D masks onto a crowd of people. That sounds very interesting, cool project. And this course will be very project based in the second half of the term. So if you have cool projects, that's certainly something very helpful in this course. But I'll be talking about the projects in a couple of minutes. Something I do in the beginning of each of my lecture, and you have seen this before if you have taken a lecture or one of my courses before, is I really like this map of computer science because it provides the big picture of the different subfields of computer science. You can find this map on the internet, and I discovered it some 5 to 10 years ago or something like this. And then I always highlight the kind of things we'll be doing in a course, primarily. And then I try to zoom in what we're actually doing. So we want to build computer vision systems. For computer vision, we also need to know about image processing. Image processing and computer vision are actually two different yet related fields. We'll be looking at the difference later. And in order to do this, we often use AI methods, in particular machine learning. In this course, we will also look a little bit into mobile robotics. And in order to speed up the training, we also need different hardware, for example, GPUs, graphics processing units. And my objectives of this class are that I provide you with an introduction to computer vision in the context of AI and machine learning. Because if you look in other disciplines like, I don't know, electrical engineering, there's also some links to computer vision, but they use quite different methods. In particular, a lot of different filters and signal processing techniques. But we'll be looking into computer vision largely from a perspective from AI and machine learning. We'll be doing lots of theory and we'll be doing lots of maths in this course, but we are also very interested in applications. And what I want you is that you learn the foundations of computer vision in this course so you can apply those to real problems and that you're able to transfer your skills to other or new methods in the future and how to use them properly. And we'll be discussing some of the current research problems and some of the trends in computer vision, and we can then discuss where all of this may go in the next few years. In order to succeed in this course, you need to know maths. We'll be using calculus in this course. We'll be using linear algebra. We'll be using statistics. For some maybe somewhat advanced concepts or concepts that you may have forgot since your Maths 1, Maths 2 course in the first year, I will be providing a few primers from time to time. For example, in one of the lectures in a few weeks, we need eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Some of you may have forgot in the meantime what that is, or some of you, maybe exchange students or students from other degree programs, may have not learned these concepts in detail. So I will provide for some maths concepts primers and revisions. You need to know about algorithms and data structures, and you need to know coding because the second part of this course will be projects. Ideally Python, but you can pick any language that you want, but simply Python is the language nowadays for machine learning and related topics in data science. So you need to know programming. If in Python, then that's great, but it's not a Python course. Python is just a tool, and obviously in your projects you can pick a different programming language. This course works the following. So we meet for 3 hours per week of lectures. And these lectures take place for the first half of the term. In the second half of the term, you'll be working on projects. And this course carries 5 ECTS, 5 credit points. And what does that mean? So one ECTS, so one European credit point, is equivalent to 30 hours of work during this term. And if we have 5 ECTS, so it's 150 hours of expected workload per student for this course. Now our term takes about 15 weeks. That means you're supposed to spend about 10 hours per week on this course. So just going to the lecture is by far not enough. In the beginning of the term, you would be spending quite some time, most of the time actually per week, on preparing for the class, doing revisions, doing further readings, doing some exercises. And in the second half of the term, work primarily on your project. And in the first half of the term, you would also be thinking about your project. But I'll say more about this later. In this slide deck, we have most of the content we'll be discussing, but sometimes I provide some extra information or I do some live calculations on my iPad. All of this will be streamed. And the examination for this course is not a written examination. Instead, it's a project. And this project takes place in the second half of the term. And projects will always be done in groups of 3 to 4 students. And there are no exceptions, or not 2 students, not 5 students. And you can do your group project on any topic in and around computer vision that you wish to do. And you can do a regular vision project, but you can also do a robot vision project if you wish. So you can have a robot that has a camera and then run your vision software on that robot and have a piece of hardware interacting with its environment. One thing that is very important, you need to register for this course in Primus or for the examination in a couple of weeks. And I'm not involved in the registration in Primus, and I don't have access to Primus for registration. So if you have any questions around how to register for the examination and you don't find the information, please contact the Center for Studies. But you do need to register for this examination because every year we have some students who present their project, but they had actually not registered in Primus. And then it's a lot of manual work for the admin assistants in the Center for Studies and me to register you and manually put the mark into the system. And because that's a lot of work, and every year somehow some students forget to register, there's a new rule in my courses as of this year. You need to register otherwise, if you don't register for the examination and you present your project, then your mark will just be invalid because it's awfully difficult for the admin assistants to manually add you later. So the easiest thing is you just register in a couple of weeks when the exams registration opens. But there will be some round mail from the Center for Studies for this. It's nothing that is currently to do because the term is just starting. And for any questions about registering in Primus, again, please ask the Center for Studies. I'll tell you a little bit now about the schedule of this course. We will have lectures for the first half of the term, and the projects will be in the second half of the term. And if you want to do a robot vision project, there is a specific date and time for you to pick the robot. While the slides say mid-April, this is always just some estimation when I create the slides. The exact date has already been communicated, and you have seen this in the iLearn course. You can pick the robots in 2 weeks from now, on Friday, the 4th of April, between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. And the room where to pick the robots, it's all mentioned in the iLearn course in the announcement section. And Mr. Runkel, who's in charge of the deep learning lab, has lots of different robots available. You can pick a robot. You don't need to pick one, but if you're interested in a robot vision project, take a look at the deep learning lab, at all the different mobile robots that have cameras that are available. There is a limited number of robots available. Historically, maybe 1/3 of the students or 1/4 of the students want to do robot vision projects. But if you want a robot vision project, go early on the 4th of April, because at some point the robots may just be all taken. If you're curious about how to use these robots and how to program them, there are lots of different platforms that are available in the Deep Learning Lab. But one platform that we have used for a long time in this course is this Chatson Nano Developer Kit. It's one of different approaches. And if you're curious to see how this works with the WaveShare mobile robot, you can just take a look into the Nextcloud directory of this course, and there's a video available that one of the past students created a few years ago. There's some glitch in my browser, so if you click in the browser on that video, you may only hear the audio, but it's actually a video. You would just download this and play it locally on your device, and then you will see the actual video. For any technical issues that you may face with the robots, Mr. Runkel, who is in charge of the deep learning lab, is the right person for you, and he's happy to assist in case you face any technical issues with the robots. I'm not directly involved in the technical issues around the robots, and Mr. Runkel is doing this extremely well, and he'll be happy to assist you. And I've put his contact data also in the iLearn announcement for April the 4th, when you can pick the robots. We will finish these lectures around mid of the term, so sometime end of April approximately. This depends a little bit on how we progress, and there are a few Thursdays this year which are public holidays or lecture-free days. So we'll just see when exactly we finish the lecture part. And sometime in early May, late April, you need to finalize your project topic, and you need to find a team and your project topic. and you will hear the exact dates from me in a couple of weeks because we first need to start with the content. So, but you can already maybe think about what kind of vision project you may be interested, but you need to only finalize this later in the term, and I will communicate the exact dates. And one student sent me here a private message asking if a robot vision project would lead to a bonus in the marking or not. No, it will not lead to any bonus. And doing a robot vision project is more work than a regular vision project because robots are messy. There are all sorts of technical issues you may be facing. You need to set up the operating system and set up all the tools and libraries on a robot. Robot projects are more work and robots are messy. Sometimes some stuff may break. You need to go to Mr. Runkle to get spare parts. But overall, it's a great learning experience and certainly something that will be a great learning for you and probably a nicer experience than if you do a pure computer vision project. But every year there are lots of great regular vision projects as well. And then in the second half of the term, you will be working on your projects. And at the end of the term, you will be presenting your projects. And this course has become extremely popular in the last few years. Last year, it was about 250 students that took this course and took the examination. And now, if we have groups of 3 to 4 students, you can guess it takes quite a while to do all these project presentations. So last year, we tried this on one weekend because we are unable to do this during the week on Thursdays. So we did this last year on a weekend, but one weekend was just very busy, like from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or something like this. And this year is probably even more students taking the course. So we will have the project presentations on 2 weekends, and I have communicated these dates already in iLearn. Concretely, that's June 28 and June 29, so a Saturday and Sunday, plus the following weekend on July the 5th and July the 6th. For now, you should just block both weekends because I'm unable to consider any wishes, like who would prefer to present on a certain day or certain time. So I'm unable to consider such requests for 200 or 300 students. And you also need to find a team. So for now, make sure that you're available both weekends, June 28, 29, and July 5th and 6th. And we will see eventually once your project topics are set and we see how many projects it is on which days you will be presenting. If it's less students this year, or I don't think it's the case, but if it were less students this year than last year, then one weekend would be enough. But probably we're going to be even more students than last year. So we need 2 weekends. And one thing that is very important, while this lecture part is via Zoom, the project presentations are on campus and on campus only, and there are no exceptions. I want to see you on campus. I want to see your project and talk to you, and your fellow classmates want to see your project too, and we want to engage in a discussion. So you need to be on campus for the project presentation. And after the project presentations at the end of the term, you'll be returning your robot in case you had picked one. There's also a marking scheme for the project, but this marking scheme doesn't matter yet because you first need to find the project topic and then so forth. But what's important in the project presentation is you present your problem, your methodology, the algorithms you'd be using, but I also want to see a demo and something that works live. Or if you have a video recording of the demo as a backup in case your robot doesn't work, something like this. But you need a demo because we want to see real vision systems and how they work and how we can use them. But I'll say more about the marking in the mid of the term. In these project presentations, they typically take 15 minutes and there will be a short Q&A session afterwards. So if we are 250 students or even more, and we have like 3 or 4 students per group, and one group presents for say a total 20 minutes, including Q&A, and we maybe have 80 groups. You can guess that this will take quite long, and we probably need 2 weekends for that. But the marking is something that will come later in this course. I want to share a few book references with you of books that I like a lot and that are very helpful for this course. There's a very interesting book. It's called Digital Image Processing, published by Gonzalez and Woods, provides excellent content on how to work with digital images. There is some machine learning in here, but not too much. But it's overall a great book. And if you want to use machine learning, excellent books that I like a lot, pattern recognition and machine learning, very great machine learning book. There are also 2 deep learning books like the Bishop one or the Goodfellow book that is now probably a little bit old in the meantime, but still provides some good concepts. And then obviously the AI book from Russell and Norvig. These are some of the books that I recommend for further reading, and most of this course is based on those books. There was a question about these project presentations, whether they are in English or German. So this course is a mandatory course for the students from the German language AI undergrad program, as well as the English language undergrad AI program. And we have lots of students from different other degree programs like cybersecurity or various master's programs that take this course as an elective. And since it's a mixed course for German language and English language students, I do the teaching in English. Ideally, you would be presenting your project in English as well, in order to make your results accessible to the whole class. But if for some reason you're unable or you feel uncomfortable giving a presentation in English, you can exceptionally give your presentation in German, but then your results will be less accessible to the other students. So I would very much prefer the students from the German program to present their project in English. And believe me, it will actually be easier in English than in German because of all the algorithms and concepts we're discussing in the course, and the most relevant literature in the market is anyway in English and not in German. Here are the exact references to the books I just mentioned. All of them are great books, and I can highly recommend you to read them. If you take a look at last year's course, so I have also uploaded the recordings of last year's course on YouTube. This year, there are not that many changes. Last year, there were more changes in the course. Obviously, there are some updates about vision transformers and all of this in the final chapter. But most of the structure of the course is the same. There are obviously improvements here and there throughout the course. Now, this was the organization of the course, and I want to know from you if there are any questions so far about the organization of the course, or if you're all fine. If you feel you're all fine, maybe just send me a green reaction. If you're not fine and you have some question, maybe send a red sticker as a reaction. And then if there is any red sticker, I'll be just waiting for your question in the chat, or turn on your mic if you have any questions. There's a question about how you submit the groups and the topics for the presentation. So this will happen sometime in the mid of the term, and there will be, in the iLearn course, there will be a submission portal where you submit the group members and the topic. And after you have submitted that, I will review all of that. I will compile a list. And then we will have one mandatory meeting in the mid of the term during our regular lecture slot in which you would give a mini presentation just proposing your project, which would take 1 or 2 minutes, but you would just briefly present with 1 or 2 slides what you want to be working on, and I would give you feedback on that. And we would see if there are a lot of students that want to work on very similar stuff, And if so, this also helps you to connect and maybe to discuss of how you can distinguish each other's projects. But that date will be sometime again in May, and I will announce it 1 or 2 weeks in advance. And you need to be in that one lecture slot that we use for the mini presentations, and everyone needs to be present. And there's a question if you pick a robot, if you would be required to do a robot vision project or not. You're not required to do that. And that's why you can already pick the robots in 2 weeks from now, in 2 weeks from now on the Friday, so that you're able to experiment with the robots. And in case you like the robots, you can go ahead, you can get some extra experience in how they work. And if you don't like the robots, then you still have time to find a different project. That's why I want you to pick the robots early, and then you'll have enough time to decide. Because we have a lecture this week and next week, and then you pick the robots. So we will anyway be far away from having finished the content of this course, so you'll have enough time to look into the robots. So I guess these were all the questions in the chat, and we can go ahead now with the actual content of this lecture. And we're still in the introductory chapter, which is to see the big picture, what computer vision is about, and how computer vision overlaps with other disciplines, but how it's also different to other disciplines. And there are a lot of intersections of computer vision, for example, with AI, because we have a lot of AI-driven methods in computer vision, but there are other approaches in computer vision, for example, a lot of intersections with signal processing methods. This is the direction I mentioned before that, for example, electrical engineers would focus on more about signal processing methods and filters from signal processing applied to computer vision. This is something that we will also look a little bit into from this course, but it's not our focus because we are more interested in AI and pattern recognition doing machine learning. We will need lots of mathematics in this course. There are also some intersections with physics, but not too much in this course. To be honest, we have a little bit for like some physics when it comes to the mobile vision robots. But we have a big intersection with image processing because we also need image processing to work on our images. And I also want to say something about the difficulty of this course. So, has any one of you already looked at last year's recordings? If so, maybe just send some green sticker or thumbs up or something like this, because we have all the recordings from last year in YouTube. So not many yet. Okay. What you will notice is if you look into the slides or last year's recordings, it's a tough course with lots of maths, and this course is tough. I know that, and I was also very ambitious when I created that course because what I wanted to do 5 years ago when I taught this course for the first time, I knew we would have half a term for the theory because I want to do projects and build real stuff and not just give you another exam paper that you need to succeed with, but rather I want you to build stuff that works. So we would need a second part of the term for the projects. So I would need to be able to teach lots of theory in the first half of the term. And every year students say this course is very challenging. And I totally agree. And I've built it this way. So when I designed this course 5 years ago, I wondered about what others teach in a computer vision course. I studied at Imperial College, London, which is one of the top universities worldwide. And I had a computer vision course there and had a look into that, into Imperial, what they are teaching now in computer vision and maybe in an advanced computer vision course. And I also looked at Stanford and the MIT at their introductory as well as their advanced computer vision courses. And it's tough stuff. And from these 6 courses from top universities, I've picked some of the topics that I find they are important to understand computer vision, but also to building real computer vision systems in practice. So some of the stuff we are discussing here is maybe stuff you'd be finding at MIT's Advanced Computer Vision course. So it's going to be a tough course, and there's going to be lots of mathematics, but for some of the concepts, I also found ways to maybe derive them in a maybe a little bit more elaborated way, or that I added some math primers to make it more understandable. While if you studied those topics at MIT or Stanford or Imperial, maybe some of that stuff would be less understandable. And here I try to make these topics as understandable as possible. Yet it's tough stuff, so you need to spend enough time on your revision and maybe some revision of the math foundations. But every year I see very, very good computer vision projects. And historically, most of the students in the last years actually got a top mark, like a 1.0 or 1.3. Actually, that's what most of the groups get every year. Because I notice if I challenge the students here with this very, very tough course, it actually enables them to build really, really good computer vision projects. And so it will be tough for you and you need to spend time on revision, but you need to be working on a project later on, and it will not be a written exam in which I would quiz you on all the theory. So don't be scared about the difficulty of the course because every year we see lots of really cool vision projects. Now, I want to look at some of these terms a little bit closer. In particular, image processing. Image processing is not a synonym for computer vision. Image processing allows us to do some simple operations, say, simply speaking, allow us to do simple operations on images. For example, we can improve the contrast of an image. We can try to remove camera or motion blur. We can try to enhance colors, enhance structures, maybe remove some defects like scratches or other noise. And this has nothing to do yet with AI or machine learning, at least not if you do this in a simple way, because often there are relatively simple operations in image processing to do these tasks. And if we have an image and it has some noise or some defects, maybe we first need to cleanse the image from that noise or those defects, and then we can do computer vision very well on it. So image processing is often like a pre-processing step for our images before we actually apply more advanced vision concepts to them. And then in computer vision, we actually have lots of example tasks that fall into the field of computer vision. You before have mentioned some computer vision use cases or some projects you have worked on previously. And here are some that I want to propose. For example, we have an image and there's an object in the image, and with a computer vision system, we want to determine the type of the object. So we would classify what kind of object is in the image. We could also assess physical objects for quality. So we would take a photo of a physical object, say a piece of metal that comes out of some manufacturing process, and we would assess that object for quality. We could also sometimes break a picture into different parts. We could try to reconstruct the 3D representation of an object. We could try to extract a line representation of an object. We could try to reason about a scene to deduce hidden properties. So all of this could be computer vision tasks. Some of them are easier, some of them are more challenging. And something I notice is often, so we have two fields. We actually have computer vision and we have computer graphics. And these fields are related, but some people just mix them up. Surprisingly, I've seen many people who use them sort of as synonyms, computer vision and computer graphics. They are related, But actually, these two concepts are just the exact opposite of each other. So I want to explain both concepts a little bit more, and this will also help you to understand better what they have in common, but also how they differ. For computer vision, what we want to do is we have a photo or a video or whatever of a scene, and we want to deduce hidden properties. So what we need to do is we need to use some computer vision model, for example, a neural network, but we could also be using something different in order to infer parameters of the scene. For example, we could try to find some objects in here, find out something about the geometry in here, make some assessment of the image. So we'll use some model, be it a neural network or some other vision system, to deduce these properties, hidden properties. And later we look at some more definitions, what computer vision is really about. But computer graphics is just the opposite, because in computer graphics, we start with the scene parameters, with a description of the objects, geometries, illumination, and all of this. And then we render these parameters into an image. So we generate an image from these properties, while in computer vision, we want to infer the scene parameters from an image. So these two things are actually just the exact opposite. But nowadays, with some vision transformers, they actually combine both into one big model. For example, we have an image and we have this as an input, and then we want to generate a new image. So we would first find these scene parameters and somehow modify them and then generate a new image. So with some of these vision transformer architectures, we do all of this in one big model. Not all the time, but sometimes. But remember for now that computer vision is just the exact opposite of computer graphics. And building computer vision systems is challenging. And we will now look at some typical questions that arise when you build vision systems. And we will see lots of challenges that you may face as well. So one question is, if you have whatever vision use case, you need to know in the beginning or define what information is sought from the image. Like, what do you want to determine in the image? What do you want to find, classify, or assess, whatever? So this is pretty much the beginning of the use case. Then the next question is, how is this manifest in the image? So you're looking for maybe some object. So you would need to define what this object may look like and its variations maybe. Then is there any prior knowledge that would be needed in order to recover this information? So is there maybe some rules we can set? Is there maybe some specific training data we have available? Can we learn all of these concepts, or do we need to combine rules with learning? So can we incorporate some prior knowledge or not? Then what is the computational process that we actually want to do? And how should the required information be represented? So these are all questions that you need to wonder about in the beginning. So also later when you work on a project, you will have some use case that you define, and early on you need to think about these questions, and not just these questions, probably there will be more questions in order to build your vision system. And spend enough time on answering these questions in the beginning, and they are often not that easy to answer, but don't just start coding your vision system, because you first need to analyze the requirements well. Now, we'll be looking at a few more examples and a few more challenges to motivate this. For example, when you just go back at these previous design questions. So, for example, how is something manifest in an image? Say you get an image, and in that image, you will have a house as well as trees. And it's your task to separate the house from the trees in the image, or to find the image, but there find the house in the image, but there will also be trees. So you can wonder about how does the house actually distinguish from the trees? Could be colors, maybe, but maybe it's just a grayscale image. Maybe you could think about straight lines. Straight lines are more characteristic for the houses than the trees. Some parts of the tree may be more or less straight, but not exactly straight, while the house may be. But you could have also houses of totally different shapes that are maybe not straight. Maybe more houses that look like a sphere or something. So it really depends on your exact data and what you want to find. So you see, answering these questions is maybe ambiguous. Or in an image, you want to separate land from sea. So you would have maybe a satellite image or an image recorded by a drone, and you want to separate the land from the sea in your aerial image. You could think about, well, the patches in the image where you have a uniform reflectivity, this actually could be the sea and not the land, because in the land, you typically don't have uniform reflectivity because you have different objects there, maybe some rocks, some grass, a road, whatever. While on the sea, it may probably be more uniform, but not perfectly uniform. Maybe there's some waves or something, or maybe some other objects in the sea. But this could be maybe a good start to somehow separate the land from the sea. Now, I want you to look at this image briefly. Many of you have probably seen it before. What do you see? I see a vase. What else may you spot in there? And if you've seen something um, else than a vase, maybe send this to the chat. Or raise your hand if you want to make an audio contribution. So, we got lots of answers. And there can be, you can also recognize two faces. One face here, there's one nose, and the other face on the right. What did you spot first, or what seems to be predominant to you? If you rather see the vase, maybe send a green sticker. If you rather see the two faces, send a red sticker. And please, everyone, contribute. I'd be happy about lots of contributions because we have 86 students in this chat or in this session, and so 14 send a red sticker, meaning they see the two faces, and about 10 send a green sticker, seeing the vase. Okay, so there's somewhat of a slight maturity for the two faces. Now, what you can see here is we can see a young woman. This is the nose of the young woman, and she's looking towards the left, and this is her ear, and here is her throat. What else do you see? Does anyone see something different and not just the young woman? And if so, let us know in the chat or turn on your mic if you want to be sharing what you may see. So you have spotted the old lady. This is her mouth. This is an eye, and there's another eye, and this is actually a nose, and the old woman is looking down here to the lower left. And again, I want to test who has rather seen the young woman, the green sticker, and a red sticker if you have seen rather the old woman. So we have like 25 answers, or even more now, almost 30 answers, and like 27 students sent a green sticker. They prefer to have seen the young woman and just a few red stickers for the old woman. But I guess most of you have seen these two images before because they're quite famous. And we see they are ambiguous. And if this makes it difficult for us as humans to recognize what we see in the image, so ambiguity can be challenging for vision systems. Now, I have something that you have not seen before unless you have looked into the slides and don't open the next sub slide to see on the right. So this looks quite strange. Somehow what I saw when I saw this for the first time is we have humans standing here. Somehow there seems to be a spaceship and there's a lake and there's a reflection so the reflection is down here of these humans. Looks confusing, right? But we can just rotate this image by 180 degrees, and then actually it may become more clear what has happened. Actually, the humans are standing here, so that's not a reflection, and the reflection is actually here in the middle, and this is a car that got stuck in that lake. To me, this whole scene has become far more clear once I actually rotated the image. Is this something you find interesting? Like, is this an image maybe you first got confused and once you saw it rotated, it looked more obvious to you? If there are any reactions, either some thumbs up or whatever, or comments. So some students seem surprised. Someone has directly seen it, what it's about. One person says he had not seen this image before. And that's why I put it here, because the two from before you have probably seen before. But overall, there are quite some surprise reactions um, that this is something new that you find interesting. And that's why I put it here. Now, again, I have an example here. We have baguettes, a lot of them. And then we have a cat here that doesn't look too different. Actually, my cat looks quite similar to this cat. And actually, it doesn't look too different in terms of the shape and color than the baguette. Well, you have the eyes and the nose here and the ears, but it doesn't look too different. So if you train a computer vision system only on baguettes and maybe totally different cats, say cats that are maybe gray or white or black, but you don't have enough cats that look like this in your training data, then maybe your computer vision system would classify a cat like this not as a cat, but rather as a baguette. And this is something we often call a bias in training data, meaning that training data is not representative for the overall population, because yes, we do have such cats, and my cat looks pretty much the same. And if I don't have such data available in my training data, then probably this cat would be misclassified. So it's all about also prior knowledge. What do we know? What kind of objects we want to detect? Do we know the variation? Do we know we have enough training data available? Can we build rules to incorporate this and all of that? So these are all the questions you need to answer early in the design of a vision system. And these are not just cats and baguettes, but you have heard about all these machine learning systems of which opponents claim they would discriminate against certain races or discriminate against women or whatever. Oftentimes, this has to do with a lack of adequate training data. That training data is biased, and so the training data could be biased in order or when separating cats from baguettes, and that's certainly something we see here. And we can continue this with classifying images either as muffins or as dogs. So we have this one up here is definitely a muffin, or down here. And this one is definitely a dog, but there are certainly some examples that are a bit more difficult to classify. Maybe this one could almost be a dog, or this one here, I don't know, or this one. So there are images that are clearly muffins or dogs, but there are some in between that we as humans can still separate. But because we have enough, we as humans have seen enough training data. We see some of these muffins maybe look very close to a dog. And that's why you need enough training data. Or you need to build proper rules in a rule-based system. Now, when it comes to vision systems, there are different levels of vision systems. For example, starting with, or there are oftentimes three levels of vision systems, from low-level vision up to high-level vision. And high-level vision would be very high-level tasks, very abstract tasks, complex tasks like recognizing objects, finding some hidden information in a scene or something like this. But in order to build these high-level vision systems, we first of all need to work on low-level and intermediate problems, and then combine these solutions and build high-level systems. And low-level tasks could be, for example, finding edges in an image, finding corners in an image, finding maybe certain straight lines. These are tasks that we call low-level vision. Not necessarily because it's very easy, but because we work on very low-level properties. Yet finding corners in an image may be actually quite difficult. But all of that is needed in order to find maybe very high-level objects or infer some hidden information from the image. There are some other low-level things, like, for example, depth. Depth means distance. Like you have an object in your photo, and you want to determine how far is that object away from the camera. It's something that is very difficult to assess from a single photo, but maybe you have multiple photos or you have multiple cameras with different angles and distances from the object. Then that's something we can do. Actually, with a neural network, we can also try to learn depth in images and then estimate depth. Something we will see later in this course. And some students have worked on this stuff before in projects, estimating depth, how far stuff is away from a camera. And we as humans, we have two cameras, we have two eyes, so we can recognize or we can find depth very well because of two eyes. Had we only one eye and we had not learned seeing with two eyes, then depth estimation would not really work for humans. And we as humans, we have two eyes, so this is something we call stereo vision. And at the end of the course, we look also a little bit at stereo vision. Then there's also optical flow. It has to do with image sequence processing, but that's also a low-level property or low-level visual task. Uh, Again, low level doesn't mean necessarily easy, but it's low level properties in an image, like how much speed we have in an image, how much distance, which edges or corners. Yet estimating the optical flow or the depth may be super difficult tasks. But then for these high level tasks, we need low level work first because we need to separate, we somehow need to find the edges of an object or its corners. And then we may need to separate the whole object from its background. So we may need the contours or regions in an image in order to separate individual objects. And for contours and regions, we need edges, corners, and other stuff. And then once we have separated the objects, because we have their contours, then maybe we can classify the objects. And that would be a high-level task. And the good thing is, in this course, we're going to do all of this. We will start today with edges. Next week, we will do possibly corners and some other features. Next week, we will probably also do contours and regions. And in a few weeks, we will do objects, and we will do depth and optical flow later in this course. So we look at all these three levels of vision. With what you will see in my slides is sometimes in my slides there is a lot of text on them slides. This is not for me to be meant to read out to you. Rather, it's maybe for you for revision or for some extra reading, for revising what I just said, or maybe get a few extra perspectives. So I'm not reading this out. Rather, it's meant for you if you want to read it for revision or further reading. So there's some text about low level, intermediate, and high level processing. Um, the human eye is a masterpiece. This course is not about biology or discussing in detail how the human eye works. Rather, this is something you had learned in your biology class in high school. But the human vision system is terrific because we as humans, we can see very well even when illumination changes or with low illumination, our eye is able to adapt to this. We are able to just learn from a couple of examples quite well, and we can generalize also to new or unseen objects. And illumination is sometimes a challenge for the human eye, but overall, changes of illumination is something we can handle quite well. And other animals can handle this even better. For example, a cat can handle low illumination or night super well, even better than humans. So our vision systems today, they don't work like humans see. They work actually totally different. And there are some things that we struggle with. For example, changes of illumination is always something that's quite difficult to handle when we build computer vision systems. But there are certain things that vision systems can do far better than humans as well. For example, quality inspection in certain, or so optical inspections in certain manufacturing processes. Humans do this okay, but there are certain vision systems that can do this far better than humans. And there are some other examples. So vision systems are great, but they are difficult to build. And this course does projects, so you're able to actually build stuff that works. Now I want to highlight a little bit why computer vision is actually so challenging. I just mentioned illumination. Like illumination is something that complicates a lot of computer vision systems. So there are some computer vision systems when you build them at home, in your office, they work well, and once you go outside, they don't work well anymore because outside you have more illumination, or you may have some shades or reflections, and then they don't work well anymore. So those are challenges. And images by nature, digital images, are noisy because there are always some shadows in it, some reflections, some blur, maybe some change of focus, some motion, because maybe you have moved the camera while taking the photo or the object has moved. So images are noisy, and this is some general thing we need to be able to address. And if you use purely a neural network where you feed in noisy images, this often doesn't work too well. So oftentimes you need to pre-process images. And that's something we will also see today, later in the lecture, how to pre-process images. Then when you look at objects, in reality, the appearance of objects may change. Maybe the shape, maybe you want to detect cats in an image, but every cat looks different, maybe in terms of the shape, in terms of the size, the color. But all of this also depends on your pose, on the angle, on the distance, on the lighting conditions. All of that severely complicates your vision task. Sometimes you can control this. Maybe in a factory, when you do visual inspections with some kind of box. Maybe in that box you would have your camera, which has always the same distance to the objects and controllable illumination. Then maybe this becomes far easier. But once you deploy these systems in a real world outside, then you need to deal with all of these challenges because those are uncontrolled environments. In order to understand images, we need some cognitive ability. And once we combine vision with robotics, it gets even more challenging because we have a massive data rate. We have more than 20 images per second with a camera. Maybe there are real-time requirements, so your robot needs to react very, very quickly and doesn't have 10 seconds to react. And that's why if you're interested in a robot vision project, the robots we provide you, they have GPUs, so graphics processing units embedded on the robot or on the edge. And this helps us maybe to process some of the data quicker, maybe to run a neural network directly on the edge in order to make predictions faster. So all of these are challenges. But you have probably noticed I had skipped the first bullet point, and I have skipped that on purpose because we'll discuss this now. I think that the first bullet point is the most difficult one, and that's why I'll mention it at the end now. If you wonder what is the challenge in computer vision, actually, I think you can just say this in one sentence. The challenge is we are dealing with an under-constrained inverse problem from a 3D world, from a 3D world, a 3D world from 2D images. So I'll say it again, we're dealing with an under-constrained inverse problem. We have a 3D world, but actually we look at 2D images. So we have a 3D world, but only 2D images. So that's already a huge loss of information. And now you're wondering what is an under-constrained inverse problem. So an inverse problem is the process of calculating from a set of observations the causal factors that produce them. So we have images and we actually want to see what has produced that image, like what kind of scene. So I want to infer the scene parameters. So it's an inverse problem. And under constraint because we lose massive information by taking 2D images of that 3D world, and there's lots of information simply missing. And that's why it's an under constraint problem, and it's an under constraint inverse problem. So this is probably the best description that I ever found about why computer vision is so challenging. And all of this here is just consequences because it's under constraint, because we have these different appearances, we have the noise, and so forth. So all of that leads or contributes to the under constraint property, and it's an inverse problem. And in general, inverse problems are probably quite tricky. So this is the motivation of this course. You have now seen a little bit what computer vision is about. We have talked about some examples of computer vision. We talked a bit about the organization of the course. And something I would very appreciate is if you have any questions on projects or so, maybe just wait a little bit or ask in the next class, because typically I receive after the first lecture 30 emails about organization details of the projects. To me, this doesn't matter yet because once we advance with this course, I think a lot of these questions will just disappear, and you should just wait a little bit to absorb the information of the course, see how the course is going, and then probably a lot of these initial questions will just disappear. Obviously, if there's some urgent question, whatever, I'll be most happy to answer it. But project-related questions, I think all of this will just become a little bit more clear once we actually advance with this course. And we'll now look into the next chapter, pixels and filters. We will, in this chapter, briefly look at digital cameras and how they turn our analog input into a digital representation. And we'll see how digital images are represented. And then we will look a little bit at to noise, which is one of the challenges we have seen so far. And we will then be looking at different filters to manipulate our images. And then the last point is edge detection. So we'll look into various algorithms that detect edges in images. I won't be discussing in detail how digital cameras work. This is maybe something that would be done more in, I don't know, electrical engineering course or something like, or a program or something like this. But essentially, our digital cameras, what they do is a discretization of reality, because we're in this analog reality, and somehow we need to map this in on the digital world, which always leads to some loss of information by doing a discretization. And you can maybe you've learned this before during high school, or you can study on your own how in detail a digital camera works with its lenses and how it maps eventually the input then on the discretization. But what we need is eventually this discrete representation, and this is the one we're going to be working on. And I'm deeply sorry that I forgot the screen share. Um, Maybe if this happens next time, just turn on your mic and tell me because I don't look at the comments all the time. So this was just here, and this is the digital camera, which maps our analog input on the on a digital representation, and we do a discretization. So you, by having forgot the screen share, you didn't really miss anything yet because the interesting images will only come now. So the discretization happens along different dimensions. So we have this object here, so we have a scene element in the real world, and we see it has continuous shape, and we have an illumination source, and we have our digital camera, and eventually it will map this object on our discrete representation. And what gets lost is this curvy continuous shape, because eventually we have a pixel matrix, which is n times n pixels, whatever. So we are unable to fully maintain this continuous shape. Rather, we'll have a discrete shape. If we have more pixels available in our image, that's great because then this loss of information goes down because we can try to represent this better. So imagine the pixels were maybe like each of these pixels were split now into, say, 4 pixels. Then obviously we would have far more pixels available and we could represent this image maybe a little bit better. Yet information gets lost. So that's one of the discretizations, but we have another discretization. Do you have any guess what other discretization we may have when mapping this real object onto a digital representation? If you have any clue what the second discretization could be, maybe send this to the chat or just turn on your mic and tell us. And we got all of this right. One student referred to the texture and actually meant probably the color discretization, because again, also the illumination here on this object is continuous, but in our pixels, we are unable to store continuous values because these pixels are also digital. So there's a certain maximum number of distinct colors we can store there. For now, it's just grayscale images, and actually for most of this course, we'll be working with grayscale images. because when you map a RGB or color image on grayscale, you can actually process it much easier. There will be some color vision in this course, but most of the algorithms we look at are actually for grayscale images. And then for each pixel, we can store a certain number of possible grayscale tones. Typically, you would have like 1 byte per pixel. And if you have a byte, you can remember you can store 256 uh, distinct representations. And what you would say oftentimes is a 0 is black and the 255 is white. And then in between, you have these grayscale values. And while this here is continuous, the grayscale is also discrete. So we have a discretization both along the shape as well as the intensity of the color or grayscale. So two discretizations. And here there would be even actually one more. Imagine this scene element actually was not in a grayscale world, but were actual real like colors, RGB values, and we would only store a grayscale image. Then we would also have that loss of color on top. So but for our algorithms that we see in this course, it's far easier to deal with these pixel images rather than these continuous structures. Working with these continuous structures is again something that I mentioned before, say from the signal processing world, which is more attached to the field of electrical engineering. They would sometimes, not all algorithms that they have, but some would maybe more address this continuous world. But we in computer science, we like binary or we like digital representations. And that's why we would typically be working with a format like this. And we would typically have an n times n matrix, so n columns, n rows to store these pixel values. And we can represent an image as a matrix of pixel values. So this one here is not an n times n matrix, but an m times n matrix. So m rows and n columns. So this would be A00, A10 for the first row, and column 0 up to m minus 1 because we have m many, so from 0 to m minus 1. And this would be so row m minus 1, column 0, and then column 1, and so forth. Something I try to do consistently throughout the course is if I have a matrix and the matrix represents our image here, we would denote the name of the matrix with a uppercase symbol like A, for example, and in bold. So it's something I try to do continuously throughout the course because one issue is if you collect content from lots of different references, different books. They all use their own notation, and I've tried to use one consistent notation as far as possible throughout the course. Wasn't possible at every single slide, but I tried to harmonize the notations. And then my convention is for a matrix, we use an uppercase character and in bold. And if you have a lowercase character in bold, it would be a vector, like a small a bold would be a vector, and a regular variable that would be just a scalar value, because this A00 would be a scalar value. Again, typically a byte, so a value between 0 and 255, where 0 denotes black, 255 white, and in between you have these grayscale values. So this is a very common representation in computer vision, and what I've just said, from 0 to 255 for each scalar entry A I J. This is the grayscale representation, and there are obviously color models as well. There are some color models, like probably the most famous one is RGB. So for each pixel, you would have three byte values. You would have a red channel, a green, and a blue channel. And depending on how you blend red, green, and blue, you get your concrete color. And for each, so you would have the red, green, and blue value. Each of that would be represented by 1 byte. So you would have 3 bytes per pixel. This is probably the most common model that all of you have seen before, almost all of you. There's another one. It's the CMY, where you have cyan, magenta, and yellow. This is a different color model, which is, for example, used by publishers, or if you look into your printer at home, you would typically see these colors. Like in my laser printer, I have cyan, magenta, yellow plus black. And these are the three channels in the CMY model. Uh, but you can easily convert between them. Now, when it turns out, say you have RGB and you have some, say orange-like color, and you want to make it lighter or darker, this is quite difficult because if you have some orange mixed from this and you just want to make the orange a bit darker or a bit brighter, you don't really know how to adjust these byte values in order to keep the color tone, but you just want to change its intensity a little bit. And the CMY model does not help you with that either. So this is complex. And that's why there is a whole family of other image representation models like HSI, HSX, whatever. Maybe you can just send me a thumbs up if you have ever seen such a model before, something like HSI or some variation thereof. Maybe thumbs up, green sticker, or just red sticker if you have just no clue, if you have never seen anything like this before, that would also be totally fine. And there are some students who have never seen this, and that's absolutely okay. That's why we're discussing it here in this introductory course. So HSI stands for hue, saturation, and intensity. What does that mean? These are three parameters of the HSI model. So we have the I is the intensity, and we have everything between black and white. Then we have the U, the H, which is sort of, it's maybe not physically correct, but you can go in the spectrum along. So you have red, yellow, green, blue, magenta. So H is this angle of this arrow, and you can rotate it around here. So from red to blue to magenta, whatever. So it's up to 360 degrees. And then the saturation is something in which you go out with this arrow. And you can see this, for example, here, that you have some red here, but it becomes a stronger red if you move out of this circle. This is obviously a little bit difficult to visualize on like this doesn't look too great on a typical screen or in Zoom. This could maybe be printed better on a very good piece of paper or with maybe visualized with a better screen. But I guess you can get the intention that this looks like more greenish, more reddish. And this is the saturation. And now, if you say you have some red and you just wanted to make a bit brighter or a bit darker, then you change the intensity. However, if you have a red and you want to keep its saturation and its intensity and you just want to shift it more towards yellow, then you would just change this angle H and rotate, say, from here to, so from this red to this yellow over here. Then you would just go along on this circle, but you would not change the saturation and the intensity. So this model is very helpful to play with these parameters, and it's probably far more intuitive to use than if you use, say, RGB. If you use some program like, I don't know, Photoshop or other tools, you definitely have seen something like this in which you have maybe some circle like this and you can pick the color and you can manipulate the parameters. So this may be something that you have seen before. Now, HSI is one of many models of that sort. There's a huge family of variations in which they all slightly differ. It's typically they differ about this intensity. Sometimes it's two cones, so we have one cone here, or we have and the second cone here. There are some models where it's only one cone, and there are um, there are various variations, and depending on where you look in the literature, all of these definitions may slightly differ. So the literature has proposed an HSV, where V stands for value, L stands for lightness, B stands for brightness. So I would just say this is a family of HSX models. Which exactly has one cone or two cones? Honestly, it doesn't matter to me too much here. But just be aware that it's not just HSI, it's HSV, HSL, HSB, and some definitions in the literature are just contradictory, so pay attention to that. But you should get the concept that you can play with these parameters and you can then, for example, change the saturation, change the hue, change the intensity. And all of this is far easier to manipulate than trying to change your three channels in order just to make color a bit darker or brighter. And with this HSI, HSX models, this works better. Now you probably wonder how you can convert from RGB to HSI and back. Um, that's why I recommended these books before, and I mentioned this digital image processing book from Gonzalez and Woods. This one, you can just look it up. The equations are in there, or the formulas of how to convert from RGB to HSI and back. Um, we are not discussing this here because eventually it's just a few formulas that honestly you will never implement yourself. You would just use a library to convert between these different formats. So it's something, if you're curious about these formulas, just look it up in the book, or you would just use a library of how and then automatically convert between these different models. Then we will come to a very famous image in computer vision. Who of you has ever seen Lena or Lena, depending on the literature? Sometimes this person is referred to as Lena or Lena. Maybe send a thumbs up if you have ever seen Lena or Lena. Maybe red if you have never seen this person. So most have not seen it. This image is very popular in the computer vision world because it's an old photo from a few decades ago, but you have some interesting properties in here. You have this face, you have the head, you have different colors, you have different shapes in here, you have the hair, you have a mirror, you have this head, the hair, and so forth. And this image, for whatever reason, became popular in the computer vision world. Not something I came up, was done a long time before, but it was just somehow interesting because of these different shapes and the colors. The reality is, this image is from a Playboy magazine in the 1970s, and what you see here is just cropped. So if you try to get that Playboy magazine, the image will be longer and you'll be seeing more. It's nothing we put here in this computer vision course. It's not a course about Playboy magazines, but if you're curious, you'll find this. This image has been used for decades in computer vision. I don't know why people have used it, but it became popular, and most people who use it probably don't know where it has come from initially. And recently, in the last few years, there has been a lot of skepticism about this image, especially with all these diversity movements. there has been this goal of eliminating the use of this image in the scientific world. I'm not using the image, yet I put it here because you will often see the image and you may face some criticism if you use the image in, I don't know, your experiments. You will not face criticism from me because to me it's just an image. At least the cropped one here is totally fine to be used. But you will see it over and over again, and that's why I want to mention it here and also discuss why it's currently being challenged and why some people aim to eliminate the use of that image. But there's even a Wikipedia article about this image in case you're curious to learn more. And because some of the examples I'm using now that I found on the web that visualize stuff very well, they will be about Lena again. That's why I first briefly wanted to mention why this image is why this image is being used and where it comes from. What we will see now is we will look at selected regions of an image, of the image. For example, just around the eye of Lena. And concretely, this is then a window which is 23 rows and 33 columns. So something like this. And what you see here is the intensity. So the intensity, remember, is between 0 and 255, where 0 is black and 255 is white. And what we see in here is, for this eye, there is some part of the eye, so the outer part of the eye, that is the white part. So we have this very high intensity here and there. But in the middle of the eye, it's quite dark. And that's why we have this lower area down here. This is the original image. And now I told you that noise is a huge issue in computer vision. And there is something, a type of noise that is often referred to as salt and pepper noise. Because you see down here we have the salt and pepper noise distortion. And we see we have the image, and suddenly we have a lot of black and white dots spread throughout the image. It's like if you just put salt and pepper on top of the piece of paper you have printed out. And with this salt and pepper noise, it can, for example, happen from illumination. It can happen maybe from some errors in the data processing and other issues. We see that we have all this noise. This dark area has lots of white peaks, which are the noise. And this originally bright area has also lots of holes now, which go deeper, which are the black parts that were added. And we certainly see if I want to do some more advanced image processing on the original image, that's fine. But if I use the noisy image, all of this will be more difficult because I have much more noise now. And working on an image like this, it will be more difficult to find some pattern or do some segmentation, whatever, than on working on this because the original pattern got disturbed. So that's an issue. And we will now look at so-called filters. And for this, I will also switch to the iPad and I'll show you how some of these filters work and derive them with you. And we will apply them to a couple of images. So now we can define a so-called local average filter, which allows us to remove the noise partially. It's a local average filter. And what it does is the following. Imagine you have an image. Let's just simplify some matrix. and it's noisy. And so I want to try to cleanse some of the noise. And concretely, the result will be a new pixel image in which we try to improve the quality. And for my new image, which will be called G, it's the result image. I have my coordinates I and J. So this would be, for example, so row I and column J. So it would be this pixel here is that I want to compute now as the result from my original noisy image. And what I could do is something like I would look at the so-called neighborhood of that pixel, and the neighborhood is something I call omega ij, so the neighborhood of pixel ij. For example, that neighborhood could be the pixel itself as well as all the pixels around it. So this was ij, and that pixel plus its 8 pixels around it are its neighborhood. That's why I've highlighted this now in red. So what we could do is we could go through the neighborhood. So we go through all pixels in the neighborhood, and the current one in the neighborhood we are looking at is mn from that set of neighborhood. So the neighborhood is a set. And I could go through all these pixel values in my original image. So the original image is f, and I'm looking at pixel mn. So I can also write this here. So the original image, and G is the result. And I could summarize, or I could add all these pixel values in the neighborhood of ij, which would include maybe ij itself plus the 8 pixel around it. I would sum all of these values up. Remember, it's grayscale values. And now I'm summing this up, but I also finally, I could have an invalid value because my value is only allowed to be between 0 and 255. But if I add up 9 values that are bytes, my result most likely would be more than 1 byte. So I need to normalize this and divide by W, where W is the size of the neighborhood. So the neighborhood could be the pixel and its 8 pixels around it. It could be more pixels around it, could be less, depending on how I define the neighborhood. And W is the number of elements in the neighborhood. And there's a question if this is not essentially blurring the image. Yes. So I'm blurring the image, and this is how I try. We will later look at more filters that are also called blurring. So essentially, I'm just trying to clean the image by washing out the noise, the outliers. Very importantly, this does not fully remove the noise. So once I have noise, I have information lost. I'm just trying to blur it a bit by trying to wash out some of this sharp noise, hoping I can then process it better. But it's not like the noise would fully disappear. And you cannot just add noise to an image and then remove the noise again because information is lost. But we'll later look at more filters, and this is just the initial filter. It's the local average filter, and it's up to you how you define the neighborhood, if it's the pixel and it's 8 pixels around it, or if it's more or less. Sometimes the neighborhood may not include the actual pixel, but only the pixels around it. So this is something that you would define depending on your use case. There's also a slide for this, but we're not just looking at slides. So I also want to develop some of these things step by step with you. And what we see here is we have our noisy Lena image with the salt and pepper noise. And then we do the local average filter first iteration. We see some of the noise starts to disappear. It gets blurred. And I do this again, and the noise starts to disappear more, but it gets more and more blurry. And one of the consequences of just blurring is, yes, maybe we can try to wash out the noise a little bit, but also our structure gets lost. For example, even for this noise in the Lena image, we see, for example, the contour of the head looks quite well. But if I keep blurring and blurring, some of that noise may actually be disappearing, but the straight structures or the contours may also be disappearing. So there are side effects. And there are lots of other filters, not just our local average filter. You could have a thresholded local average, so you may add some thresholds, or you would only look at certain values that are maybe within certain thresholds, not all of them, or you would only look at maybe extreme outliers. You could have weights for the individual pixels in the neighborhood, so you could say some elements in the neighborhood are more important than others. What we did, we just summed up and divided. So we did a mean, sometimes it's also called a mean filter because I'm calculating the average, the mean. You could also have a median filter. So you would just calculate the median of the neighborhood and take that one. So there are lots of possible examples of what you could do. And depending on your use case, you may need a thresholded, you may need a weighting, you may need a median. This largely depends on your use case. And you're most welcome, since I told you most of the time you need to spend on this class is outside the actual lecture, feel free to do some of this at home. There are libraries for Python to work with images. You could also try to code this on your own. You can represent the image quite easy as a matrix in NumPy, and from there you could just build those filters on your own and try to manipulate the images and then visualize them and see what the outcomes are, or use libraries to do this for you. So you should definitely try this out to get a better understanding. From a more abstract perspective, what we have just done is just a special case of a so-called convolution. We have talked about convolutional neural networks today. They are also related to this, but first of all, a so-called convolution is a concept that comes from signal processing. And a convolution, this is a 1D convolution. A 1D convolution, so it would not be for a matrix image. This would be something you would apply maybe to some linear input, a one-dimensional input. And very importantly, to a continuous input, not a discrete input. So a discrete input would be like an array, for example, or a list of entries. But what we actually want to deal with is a continuous input. So this is what signal processing is very much concerned about. And there you can define a so-called one-dimensional convolution. And what it actually does is it combines two functions. Because we have the function f for our original signal. This was before the original image that we looked at. And we have g, the filtered signal, the result. And the filtered signal is eventually a combination of the original signal and h, which is the convolutional mask. And the convolutional mask is typically a probability density function. And like this, you can manipulate your original signal and have the filtered signal. This is what electrical engineers and signal processing scientists like. We're doing computer science. We will simplify this. Now, if you want to work with and concretely, the one-dimensional convolution eventually is an integral of the original signal multiplied with the convolutional mask, where you have the x minus u and x or g of x would be the filtered signal, and it's an integral along u. So this is the one-dimensional one, and if you want to have a two-dimensional convolutions or something, we could apply maybe to some video input or yeah, some actually an image input, yeah, an image input, um, where we don't have discrete data but rather continuous data. Then you would have a two-dimensional convolution. So you would have x and y and u and v, and you would have this convolutional mask x minus u and y minus v along u and v. But such two-dimensional convolutions is certainly something not that we as computer scientists like to work with. And we in computer science were anyway not too concerned about continuous signals, because I told you this is about continuous signals, and that's why it's also a continuous integral from minus infinite to plus infinite, and again minus infinite plus infinite for the two-dimensional one. But for our representation, the discrete one, we don't need these integrals because probably something that you know, if you want to switch from your continuous signal to a discrete signal, you don't need these continuous integrals anymore. Rather, you need sums. And if you remember before, we actually had a sum sign rather than the integrals. And we can use the sum because we work with discrete input and not with continuous input. And you may wonder, why did we only have one sum sign for the local average filters? Or local average filter was for images along two dimensions, but we just have one sum. We could have it probably with two sum signs if we wanted to write it out, but we just say we have one sum because with that one sum sign we go through the neighborhood, but you could split up that neighborhood in x and y again and then have two sum signs if you write it differently. But this for now this is just looks neater because we have the neighborhood here. So we're gonna, this is pretty much one of the only few times we see integrals in this course. We will see integrals again, I think, when we look at the Kalman filter to deal with image sequence process, image sequences, but we won't be dealing a lot with integrals in this course. Rather, to build our filters, we work with sums because we work with discrete inputs. And what we want to do now is we want to look at some concrete filters for our discrete images. If you're curious to learn more about these convolutions, they, at least the ones from signal processing, they are also visualized quite well in Wikipedia as one of many examples, and you can look at that if you wish. When you looked at that two-dimensional integral, you can re-express this also in terms of our sum, our original signal, our convolution, and the filtered signal. Yet, I personally don't like this notation too well, and I think it looks confusing to a lot of students. Rather, we will use a different notation in terms of matrices that I personally find far more intuitive. And for this, I will briefly switch back to my whiteboard. So, and for these filters, there's a very interesting notation because what I have shown you here is we looked at this neighborhood of the pixel and its 8 pixels around it. And this is something that in our notation from now on, we can write in a different way. We can write a matrix and we put in 9 ones, and I'll explain you in a moment what they mean. So I know among international students and German students, there's always some confusion about what this sign is, but in Germany, this is a 1. It's not a 7. A 7 we write as something like this. I know some international students, they write a 1 like this, but I typically write the 1 like this. So these are all 1s. And we divide by 9. What this means is the middle pixel is my blue pixel that I looked at. And the 8 around it are the neighborhood. And the 1 means that each of these pixels has weight 1. And because I look at 9 pixels and in total I have weight 9, I divide by 9. I could change this and I could, for example, say that my pixel here has weight, say weight 2, and then I would need to update this normalizer, and the normalizer is simply a sum of all these weights, and I would divide by 10. Is this something that makes sense to you, what this notation here means? Maybe thumbs up, thumbs down, if you got the idea of this concept. There are lots of filters, and we're briefly going to look at them. And now that we've seen this new notation for our filters, it will be fairly easy for you to understand what all of these filters mean. There's only one note, and it's again because the terminology is not used consistently throughout the literature. I have now talked about filters. You've heard the term convolutions, and the convolutions before we introduced something like this in the continuous world. But these filters are sometimes also called convolutions. Sometimes these filters are called kernels. Sometimes they are called masks, and sometimes they are called operators. For now, we're going to use all of them as synonyms. And while I always would be happy to say filter, I sometimes may say kernel, mask, convolution, whatever. It all means the same. So don't be confused. And if you look into the literature, the terminology used may vary. But our local average filter from before just looks like this. And you could make it bigger, obviously. You could look around more elements, but just make sure that the normalizer is always the sum of the individual, of all the weights. And probably the simplest filter possible is just the identity. This strange animal here, whatever it is, it's from Wikipedia, but there are good examples. I didn't come up with this, and I didn't want to use Lena again, so I just used the one that I found on the internet as an example that we can use consistently. So the identity filter doesn't do anything. It's just the identity. It takes the pixel and it doesn't take any pixels around it. And because the weight is 1, the sum of the weights is 1, so I don't need any normalizer. The local average filter we saw is sometimes also called a box blur or just blur, or it blurs a box. So we see the original here has some noise. The noise starts to get washed out, but straight structures like here or around the eye, which has a very clear contour, this starts to get lost. You can also use a Gaussian blur. A Gaussian blur 3 times 3 would mean that you would put a high weight on the actual pixel, and then the direct neighbors in the horizontal and vertical would have weight 2, and the neighbors in the diagonal would have a 1. So you could imagine that this would somehow look like a Gaussian function in 2 dimensions. And if you add up all of this, the sum will be 16. And the Gaussian blur just puts more emphasis on pixels that are very close to our pixel, including our pixel, and puts less emphasis on the pixels around it. You can have more Gaussian blurs, like Gaussian blur 5 times 5. So our pixel would have weight 36, and the immediate neighbors in the horizontal and vertical 24, in the diagonal 16, and then the further you go, the quicker this drops off because it's Gaussian
Can
function.
I ask some question
Yes.
about this fraction before the matrix? So this fraction, for example, 1/16, this is for just for the normalization of the
Yes.
pixel. So this
The
close the gap.
normalization is always the sum of the weights. And if you see this is 4, 6, 10, 14, 16. So these weights summed up is 16. That means when you apply this filter to a pixel, you sum up the 9 pixels plus including the weights. So the weight or the value of that pixel would have factor 4, the weight of that pixel would have factor 2. And so in order to have correct values, you need to normalize by the sum of the weights. Okay?
Sorry, I have a question also.
Yeah.
If the pixel we're looking at is the center pixel, so for example, for the 3 by 3 matrix, why is it 1 over 16 instead of 4 over 16?
Um, Because we say when we calculate the Gaussian blur, we say our pixel is more important than the other pixels around it. But they still have some importance. So we say the value in our pixel would be 50, for example. So something that is a little bit gray, more dark. I would multiply this by 4, so I have 200. I would take the pixel to the right, which is maybe value 30, multiplied by 2, and so forth. And I need to normalize by the sum of weights. If I put here 4 divided by 16, I would get invalid values because then the value could be more than 1 byte. So I always need to normalize by the sum of weights.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And the same here for the Gaussian blur. If you sum all of this up, the weights will have a sum of 256, and that's why I need to divide the result by 256. And then this filter, I move it throughout the original image. So I would start with the first pixel, then calculate the result, then move this filter to the next pixel. So I would apply the filter to every pixel in my image in order to calculate the result. But it's important that when I have this, like we saw it very well here, so this is for the result image pixel ij, and obviously I move this mask or filter whatever throughout the original image, but I always read from the original image and I only write in the result image. So don't mix up new and old values so that you would update your image and then you move the mask through it and somehow partially read in some of the new values. This will not work. So you need a new variable or a new matrix to which you're writing, and you're always reading from the old one. So don't mix up old and new values. And that's why I encourage you, maybe use a library, maybe implement this stuff on your own. It isn't that difficult to implement this. It will certainly be helpful. What we can also do is we can try to sharpen. So sharpen is just the opposite of blurring. We can try to sharpen our image. And what would happen is that typically some contours would appear even stronger, but you will also have some strange effects in it. And it's very important that sharpening and blurring, they are not inverse operations. So you cannot just blur an image and then sharpen it again and get the same image as before, because you always have some loss of information. So these are not inverse operations that would sort of cancel each other out. That's not the case. So these are the most important filters or most important operations we can do, or the simplest operations we can do on our pixel image. And we've seen the identity, blocks blur, Gaussian blur, sharpening. There are obviously many more filters. And we will now be looking at some more advanced filters for edge detection. So what is edge detection about? So far, the filters we have seen, they could allow us to improve image quality a bit for processing. Say we have a very noisy image, and using very noisy input may not work too great then in a neural network. So maybe we first blur it to filter out a little bit of the noise. and then we would put it into some bigger vision system. But there are other low-level vision tasks that are also important. Before we've seen this hierarchy of tasks, low level, medium level, and high level. And they're not just neural networks in which we can put in our images and classify everything. There are lots of other approaches. And for those approaches, one of the first tasks I need to do is detect edges. Edges are very simple features, and from these edges, I could maybe build more higher level features later on. And for edge detection, there are numerous methods that have been proposed in the literature. And essentially, edge detection is where there is a change of brightness in an image. Change of brightness always indicates there could be some edge. And it's a well-studied problem with lots of different algorithms in the literature. And it's a fundamental tool in image processing, computer vision, in particular, in order to find more high-level features, which would then be used in more high-level tasks like object recognition, tracking, whatever. So we want to build more high-level features from our low-level features, and edges are some of the lowest level features we can get. There's this image here of this girl holding a flower. And if we apply an edge detector to it, one possible result is something like this. So we see a lot of edges around the hair, the eye, um, the other eye, or the nose. Yeah, the other eye, the nose is here, not too visible. We have very good edges around the hand and the flower. And now we're wondering, how can we build such an edge detector? Do you think, what do you think could be some challenges when we want to detect edges? Are there any edges you think on this example here are good? Do you think any edges are missing? I'd be very happy to hear a little bit from you. What do you think about this result and what general challenges we may face? Feel free to send this in a chat or turn on your mic and discuss with us. I'd be very happy to discuss that with you.
I think the algorithm is failing in the texture of the sweater.
Okay, failing here in with the texture of the sweater. Okay. Any other suggestions? Uh, so I'll just read out what has been written. So for the clothes, again, the low contrast is probably a problem. The shadows could be potentially be challenging. Yes, shadows are a huge problem. They may create edges that don't actually exist, but there's a change of intensity. Low contrast, we see no edges for the background. This is filtered out. So one of the questions is the tolerance. So probably what you mean by tolerance is a threshold, like when it's an edge and when it's not. The edges of the nose are not good. Yeah, because we see there is not much change of intensity here for this part of the nose, only down here. Yet there are some shades in the face, but they don't matter too much. For example, here's some shade, but then the edges, they look quite okay in that region, because this could create new edges that don't actually exist, but doesn't work well on the background. And there are still a lot of details left, yes, but also some details in the flower are missed as well. So one student says if you want to detect the edge of the head itself, it's not possible because the hair blocks it. Yes, that's true. So the hair creates lots of noise actually when it comes to trying to filtering out the head. Could be very challenging for a vision system, but maybe quite intuitive for a human because we have lots of prior knowledge. Very good inputs from you. I fully agree with this. And we will now look a little bit at how edge detection can be done. There's lots of text here, and this is, I guess, what we have already discussed to some large extent. Um, Edge detection can also help us to reduce the amount of data that we need to process, because it's more like, because we don't need all the information in the image to process for some high-level task, maybe only the edges. And the edge detection is a crucial step, but we've seen a lot of these challenges. And feel free to read all this text for revision and further reading. I typically don't like to read out all of this text. But we've seen some of the challenges already, like we have discontinuities in the image brightness, and this leads to typically there are lots of challenges, discontinuities in depth, surface orientation. Something that can also be challenges is if illumination changes, material properties changes, and we may have different reflection. And we will soon see some image from industry which highlights this. And we've also seen that maybe some shade could create edges that don't actually exist. And we may need some thresholding as well. And edge detection looks simple for humans, but it's definitely from a computational perspective a non-trivial problem. Unless you could have a very simple scene and you can maybe control all the illumination, maybe again in some factory, you would have maybe some box in which the items get inspected automatically. You have the same distance, you have the same illumination, and always the same kind of materials. Then edge detection could probably become easier. But in the wild, meaning in reality, this may be in fact quite challenging. And we will now look at the Sobel operator. And the Sobel operator is something I will discuss again with you on the whiteboard. And we'll have the Sobel operator, which is one approach to finding edges. What we will have is we will have two 3x3 filters for this, which we apply to the original image. So we have A, it's the original image. And A is actually bold. So, but if you look in the slides whereof this is well formatted, it's in bold. It's a little bit more difficult to show this on our web. And we are now going to calculate something that we call GX. It's again in bold, it's a matrix. And we apply a so-called Sobel a filter in Sobel to this matrix. And
Sir, your screen.
sorry? Oh, screen share failed. I'm sorry. So sorry, the screen share didn't work. It's a live demo and not a recorded lecture. So fortunately, this kind of stuff happens. So I guess you can see it now. So we have A is the original image, and we will calculate something that we call GX. And GX is the result of applying a filter to our matrix A. And I will first write it out, and then I'll show you what it's for. So this is a filter, and you see there are even positive and negative weights. Before, we've only seen positive weights, but you can also have negative weights if you want. And then the notation is something, we multiply this with A. And this multiplication sign here is we actually apply our filter element-wise to A. So this is the element-wise operation. So we apply this filter to every element in A. And like this, we have the new matrix or new image Gx. What does Gx do? We see we have on the left column +1, +2, +1. And on the right, we have -1, -2, -1, and zeros in the middle column. And that means with these twos, we put more emphasis on the middle row, so what is closer to our image. And in fact, this is subtracting the right pixels from the left pixels. So it gives us some difference. And we will later visualize Gx and see what it's for. And similar to Gx, there is also a Gy to see this change along y, as we've just seen along x. So again, we have the element-wise operation. So we have +1, +2, +1. We have 0, 0, 0, and -1, -2, -1. And this filter, and again, we apply this element-wise to A to calculate our new Gy. And Gx and Gy are in fact two images which contain the vertical and horizontal or the approximations of the vertical and horizontal derivatives. So it gives us some change along x and y. And you probably wonder, what is that useful for? It's in fact, we're quite close now to building an edge detector. One thing, just as a note, is you can calculate Gx and Gy like this, but if you do it this way, it's computationally quite inefficient. So in the slides, there's some hack of how you can decompose these products and you can calculate it quicker. But this is just a hack if you try to implement it. It doesn't matter for now. But we will try to visualize this and then we come back to the maths. So we have this image here. It's a color image, but we convert it to grayscale. And the Sobel operator, once it's done, we have built two components of the Sobel operator, so the change along x and y. And now we need to combine this into the total change. And once we have the result, we will get something like this. So this is our original image. And once the Sobel operator is done, it will give us these edges. What do you think about the result of the Sobel operator? We'll soon see how to complete building the Sobel operator. Do you think the output is good or it's not good?
It is definitely better than it was before with
Okay.
this edge detection.
Okay, is there some area you specifically like or dislike?
I think the edges are smoother, and
Okay.
the quality is better overall.
Okay, smoother. We see a lot of details. We've seen this, read this now multiple times in the chat. Well, overall, it looks quite okay. So around this main part here, it looks okay. But I also see, for example, this pipe here is hardly visible because there are not much changes of intensity. So this one is something that is quite left out. What I also see is here just some scratches. They actually get a lot of emphasis on the edge detection, yet probably for some later higher level task, for object recognition, whatever, these scratches are totally irrelevant, yet they add lots of noise in the edge detector. But I think overall the result is quite okay as a start. And I'll show you now what we actually needed this Gx and Gy for. So we have another example of the Sobel operator, which is this image here. And if I want to find the edges, I see something like this. It's another example. Looks quite okay on the wall and the bicycle. What is difficult is this pipe because we have a lot of extra edges in the pipe where we just have this change of reflection and a change of, I don't know, this shape, and there's some reflection in it. So we get around this pipe a lot of edges that actually don't exist in reality. The bicycle is separated quite well. Also, the lock of the bicycle looks super good. So it has some pros, has some cons. And this chi x and chi y we have just calculated are visualized here. We have a change along x and a change along y in that image. And we have just calculated this with chi x and with chi y that changes along the two dimensions. So we have the x gradient and the y gradient. And now our goal is, after we have calculated this, we just need to combine them into our result, into our edges. And we have chi x and chi y. And actually, for each element, so for each pixel, we just need to take the chi x value squared and the chi y value squared. We sum that together and take the square root. And we do this again element-wise, and then we have our G, which is the new pixel image, which shows us the change in that, or it shows us the edge because it's a combination of the change along X and along the change of Y. This is the result, what the Sobel operator gets us. Feel free to implement this on your own. It's again not very difficult, but there are also libraries for this if you don't want to implement it, and you can get these results. And actually, it's not a lot of maths. It's just a few steps. So we calculate the changes along X and Y, and eventually we get quite a good result for the first attempt for a simple algorithm. There is another thing that you can calculate if you wish. You may wonder in a pixel how much the change, because we've calculated the change along X and Y, you could calculate something like a direction where that change goes to. And what you need to do is, for each pixel, you take the chi y value and the chi x value, and you want to calculate an angle theta for finding out in which direction that change goes. And actually, you just need the A10 function, but the only problem is calculating A10 is a bit challenging when y and x may be positive or negative, or depending on in which quadrant you would be. So a good function to handle all of this for you is the A10-2 function. So and you don't pass like a fraction, but rather the original values of chi y and chi x. And then the A10-2 function gives you the correct angle, no matter in which quadrant you are. Has any one of you ever seen A10-2? Maybe thumbs up or thumbs down if this is a geometric function you have ever seen. We are not discussing it here in detail. It's something that may be more discussed in a geometry class, but feel free to look up the definition of A10-2. I think on Wikipedia it's also actually explained quite well, because then depending on where you are in the positive or negative range, you need some cases to consider this. And rather than doing this on your own, the A10-2 function does that for you. But A10-2 is implemented in typical math libraries. It's also available in Python. So you can either use it or you can look up how it works if you're curious. And that's why there's extra time here in this course for further readings until next week. In case you want to implement some of the stuff for today, from today, in case you want to do some further reading about the A10-2, whatever, there's enough time available. So this is the Sobel operator. And the Sobel operator is, I said, you can implement it. You can use libraries for it. A library that is quite popular for such stuff is skimage, so scikit-image, like scikit-learn, scikit-image. There is a filters module You have some data available, data like some sample images, and other stuff. And we are representing these grayscale images simply as NumPy matrices. And for visualizing, we use matplotlib. Are you all okay with libraries like NumPy, matplotlib, something like this? Have you used these Python libraries? Thumbs up, thumbs down. But I only see positive reactions because I guess there was enough time in your studies so far to deal with this. If you're not, because we have students from other degree programs, if you're not familiar with these libraries in Python, don't worry, you can usually learn them quite easy. And what we are doing now is we take a sample image of a man using a camera. You will see this image soon. And we will apply the Zobel operator to this image. There's the Roberts operator. It works slightly different than the Zobel one. Feel free to read about the Roberts operator, but the outcome, I think, in most real-world data of Roberts and Zobel is not too different. And because we also want to make it towards high vision or high level vision in this course, I'm only discussing the Zobel operator, not the Roberts operator in detail. But feel free to look up what the Roberts operator does in case you're curious. But Zobel should be sufficient. And in next week's lecture, we will anyway build more sophisticated edge detectors and other feature detectors. But just for the start, in the first week, the Sobel operator is more than sufficient. And then we try to visualize all of this. So there's some boilerplate code for Matplotlib to visualize this and to visualize the outcomes. So the original image was some man using such an old camera, and the output of the Sobel operator and the Roberts operator are visualized here. Overall, I think the result is quite comparable, maybe slightly different. And we've just seen how the Sobel operator works. It's actually not that difficult, and you can either use it with one line from skimage. You can try this out on some of the image of your choice at home, or you just implement all of this on your own, which is probably a good practice too. There are obviously more edge detectors. One that is quite popular is the Kenny edge detector. And if you remember this girl here, this image here on the right is actually the outcome of the Kenny edge detector. The Kenny edge detector is a bit more sophisticated because it allows us to also ignore edges that are not that relevant, especially like here in the background. And the Kenny edge detector is, I'll just briefly discuss the steps. You can also easily use it in a library if you wish. I'll show you this later. But we could spend 3 weeks in this course only studying the Kenny edge detector in detail, but we need to move to more advanced stuff. And for Kenny edge, you just use the library. It works perfectly fine. There are a few steps that are the key steps in the Kenny edge detector I want to discuss. So first, you would apply the Gaussian filter to smooth the image in order to remove the noise. It's something we have seen before, the Gaussian blurring. Then you would find the intensity gradients of the image. That's what we have also just done with the Sobel operator along X and Y. And now the literature says you would apply a non-maximum suppression to get rid of spurious response to edge detection. So this would help you to filter out a little bit of the noise in the edge detection, and you would have some sort of double threshold to determine potential edges. So double threshold would mean you have a threshold to the top and bottom, and everything that is within this range are the edges you want to take. And then you still need to complete edges, because something that will typically happen is that your edges are typically not continuous. Sometimes your edges are interrupted. It looks very good with this girl here. Like you have this hair and you see these edges typically are not interrupted. Sometimes they are, like here a little bit, but it's quite rare because first of all, the thresholds were set well, but the edge tracking was also done well. So edge tracking would be that you have edges that are interrupted and you would sort of close those holes in between or make edges stronger to connect this. This itself is a little bit challenging, but in this course, you can just use a library for this. If we look at our machine from before and how to apply the Kenny edge detector to it, this is the result. Do you think the result looks good or bad compared to the Sobel operator? Any comments you may have, turn on your mic or send this in the chat. It's way worse, and I fully agree. This here certainly looked better. It doesn't mean so it does not mean that the Kenny edge detector is worse, but with the Kenny edge detector, we can customize these thresholds. It's something we couldn't do with the Sobel operator. And with Kenny edge, we need to play with these thresholds. And once we do this, we can actually get a very good result, and our edges should be completed quite well for us. There's also a little bit, and that's correct. The scratches get ignored quite well. That's correct. But it's also correct, we can hardly identify the machine. And again, with SK image, you can also use a Kenny edge detector. So in the feature module, you have the Kenny edge detector. And this implementation for now it has multiple parameters, but we use the sigma value, which helps for the cleansing stage, but you could still set more thresholds if you want, depending on the library. And what does it do is I have generated an image like this, a noisy square that is rotated. So this is just done in the code here, just with a few lines of code. We're generating a square that is rotated and noisy. And so we've added the salt and pepper noise. And then depending on how you set the sigma value, for sigma is 1, we get a lot of garbage. We get actually the edge quite okay, but we get lots of stuff around it that is actually just purely from the salt and pepper noise. And if we customize the sigma a little bit differently to the right value, it actually works quite well. And if you, I don't know, have this data set, one of the tasks you could try at home, apply the Sobel operator to this, see what the outcome could be, apply the Kenny edge filter, Kenny edge detector with the right sigma, and actually you get quite a good result. So feel free to try this stuff at home to study these algorithms a little bit better. There are way more edge detectors. I've briefly mentioned the Roberts operator. One operator that is often mentioned is Pruitt operator. There is edge thinning, Hiltreth edge detector. There are also second order approaches using some Laplacian approaches. These are really just further readings. If you're super curious and want to become an expert in edge detection, feel free to read this stuff. It's mentioned in the books that I refer to. But I think with the Sobel operator and the rough understanding of the Kenny edge detector, you're quite well prepared. And these other ones you would typically anyway just use from a library and not implement from scratch. For today, we are done with the introduction and an introduction to pixel images and filters. And I think even though we got a few minutes left, this is enough for you in your first week. Obviously, you can already think about projects in the next few weeks, what you may be interested in. And the more content we discuss in the lecture, the more opportunities you will probably see as well. We also have in our iLearn course a forum available in which you can connect with others in order to form groups because you need to find fellow students for your groups, but it's nothing too urgent yet. Take the first few weeks to understand what we are doing here. Next week, we'll be looking into regions of images and segmentation. We will also be looking into feature detection. So next week, concretely, we will see what segmentation is, how we can do segmentation of images. We look at some psychological theories for this. We see how we can group things in an image. And segmentation means we split our image into various segments, and we'll see how this can be done, which is then often something that will be further processed. So the individual segments may be classified, whatever. And we also will see how an image can be actually compressed by using segmentation approaches. And then next week, we will also look at feature detection. Concretely, we will see how we can find straight lines in an image. We will see how we can find corners in an image. This stuff will also be more maths than today, but make sure you understand how digital images are represented. I've given you quite some hints what you could try out at home until next week. And then if there are any questions, maybe just raise your hand now. If there are no questions, maybe just thumbs down or red stickers, I know if you're good. And with there not being, there's now a raised hand. Please go ahead.
So I had one question, but it was kind of in a bad moment when there was problems with the recording. How would, for example, loss-based compression affect the salt and pepper noise?
For compression, I would suggest we discuss that question next week because next week we look at image compression and then we can see how the noise may affect that. So it's true, you sent your question in the chat, but then we had these issues with the screen share. So for the ones who are watching the recording, we had just stopped the recording in the moment when the screen share didn't work. So we can maybe refer to your question next week when we look at image compression.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a question if you can see what robots are available. For this, you need to contact Mr. Runkel. He's in charge of the Deep Learning Lab. And I think the Deep Learning Lab also has a website. Maybe just check the university site and search for labs or the Deep Learning Lab. There should be a list of some of the inventory. Otherwise, maybe just send an email to Mr. Runkel. I had put his contact data also in the round mail a couple of days ago. Next week, we'll continue with the lecture, and with there not being any further questions, thanks for all your contributions and the great discussions, and see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.